As you look at generational succession, the next generation is not there to tear everything down and to rebuild it. The next generation is to build on what's worked. And so I think, as we look forward to the next 25, 50 years, it's really taking this culture of innovation and allowing it to continue to flourish within our ranks.
Just a quick reminder for you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better.
Hey, it's Ari. Welcome to another episode of the Made in America podcast. I am really excited to have Jon Ulbrich from Ulbrich Steel on, Vice President of Distribution Group and Director of Corporate Purchasing. Jon, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Listen, man, it's my pleasure. Second person on from Ulbrich Steel. Very excited to have our conversation. But before we get into it, it's the Made in America podcast, my friend. So we got to start off with the same two questions. What do you make and why do you make it?
Sure. So Ulbrich Steel, we are a fourth generation family business headquartered down in Wallingford, Connecticut. We make stainless steel, nickel alloys, titanium, and flat and wire products essentially for our customers who make components that go into everything in the world. Aerospace, automotive, medical, armaments, power generation, everything that you touch every day probably has something that came through our shops in it.
That's very, very cool, man. So why do you guys do it? We're at 98 years?
98.
98 years and counting. Why does Ulbrich do what they do? What do you do it for?
Sure. Well, I like to say the Ulbrich family has nothing else to do. So, but we got into the business a little bit on our history, I guess, because I'm sure that's on your list to ask.
Sure.
I'll beat you to it. We started in 1924 as a scrap mill. My great-grandfather came back to Wallingford after working in mills outside Pittsburgh during the Great Depression and got into the scrap business, moved into cutlery, and then essentially into re-roll back in World War II because he couldn't make his forks, spoons, and knives without buying metal that met the right thickness. And he couldn't buy the right thickness because of allocations during wartime. Oh. And so our business really steamrolled from the late 40s, with innovation from wartime, whether it's World War II, Vietnam, whatever it is, to kind of who we are today. And so the reason we make what we make is I think there's a couple reasons. One is Connecticut's got a very rich history of metalworking, not just in the melting and the rolling of steel, but also in the stamping and component manufacturing, specifically in the Waterbury Valley. And our business has just kind of evolved as customer needs evolved. And my grandfather joined the business back in I think the early 60s. And he was, if my great-grandfather started it, my grandfather was really the entrepreneur that had the idea to take it more on a larger international scale. And my dad joined the business back in the 70s. And, I think metal's kind of in the family blood, and that's kind of, and we just, we grow through the years, we evolve with the climate, and we work hard to meet customer demands.
So, Ulbrich are, fairly large, company at this point, 10 locations across the globe. Why do people, for people that don't really understand maybe the whole manufacturing supply chain, why would someone need to come to Ulbrich versus just going to buy metal on their own, or sort of like what's the value proposition that Ulbrich seems to have found? Right, if you've been around for 98 years, you must be doing something right.
Sure, I hope so. Yeah, we really have two different businesses at Ulbrich. One is our service center business, which I am the VP of, and that really is a supply chain role where we work with the melt mills, and there's not a lot of them in America.
Melt mills?
Yeah, so people that will actually melt the stainless steel or essentially into large metal pieces of toilet paper,
Okay.
Rolls of toilet paper, if you think of the image that way. And, a melt mill is taking raw elements, scrap, and essentially melting it down into the different chemistries for whatever the application is that someone needs to make.
So making the different types of stainless steel. So they take the raw steel and then melt it in to make whatever the components are.
Exactly. So, a melt mill is typically a very, very large business. If you don't have a very sizable amount of pounds to place, you have to work through a distributor like us. And so we work hard to have very good relationships with our customers and our vendors So we can kind of consolidate our spend and get the best deals for the marketplace. But then the other side of our business is the precision side, where we'll buy from the melt mills and we'll actually convert the metal, change the thicknesses, the mechanical properties, the finishes, for some typically unique and specialty application.
Like,
Well, I mean, a good one is something like 007 inches for high temperature, say, heat conductors.
Okay.
You know, which go into things like ATM machines. You know, there's a
Okay.
reason an ATM can work in below zero temperature. You know, it's because of heaters that are in there. And so metal that we make, you know, typically 007 inches is not exactly very popular, right? And not a lot of people can do it. But so we'll work with our customers that make those type of products to get them a very unique type of metal to go into.
so in some
those
cases, you're
applications.
just essentially providing buying power so people can actually get the materials. And in other cases, you're actually changing the raw material to be something super specific, which would be then
Correct.
even a smaller order.
Correct.
And that's what you're doing all over the
Correct.
place.
You'd be amazed how many napkin drawings we get saying, "Can you make this?"
I would be
And
surprised.
then we engineer a process or engineer a metal to actually do that. You know, we don't melt at Ulbrich, but the whole idea of kind of how we go to market, we have, I think, about 11 metallurgists on our staff, which is very unique for an American company. You know, I think we have more metallurgists than most of the melt mills have. believe it or
Really?
not. So and it's because we really work hard with our customer base to help them engineer a product for an end application that they really need to make for whether it's going into a medical device or a car or something like that. You know, so it's we have a very, I think, dynamic business. No 2 days are alike. I like to think no two customers are alike. No two vendors are alike, right? So it's so I think we're very fortunate to be 98 years young, and and we've got some good celebrations coming up in 2 years when we hit 100.
Yeah, I bet.
So I'm fortunate to be part of the family business. for
No
sure.
doubt. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. So, fourth generation in the business. Well, what drove you into, manufacturing? You're a young guy.
Sure.
Was it always something that you thought you'd want to get into? Sort of what drove you to get, into the business?
Sure. No, so I went to college I double majored in marketing and management.
Okay.
So I kind of had an idea growing up of what I wanted to get into, and family business isn't always for everyone.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a lot of the successful family businesses have generational members that have passion for what they do, and you have to be, you can't just slide into a role. You have to learn, train, be flexible and adaptive at what gets thrown at you. So you can constantly evolve to be a better leader and manager, right? So I went to college for business, not so much for metallurgy or manufacturing, really just to learn how to run a business. And I got called home after I graduated, and I took 2 weeks off from college and started working. So so part of my role and how I joined is really to lead the charge. When you're 4 generations into a business, the complexity is very different than it was, 50 years ago when my grandfather joined it. And so, you have to really have a very good understanding on how to run a business in general, not just treat it as a 8 to 5, day-to-day role. You have to have a much more holistic view and a larger focus on what your purpose is, I think.
So how do you think about that when you think about the purpose?
No, I mean, I think we have over 700 employees, and you mentioned 10 facilities. For what we do in the world for the metals market, it's important that we do it right. And I know my father last time he was on talked about how we do things right the first time, all the time, and that's really our goal. And I think within our family we have very similar philosophies. When we run the business, it's not just because we have to. It's because we want to be here. We want to make sure everyone has a paycheck, everyone has a good job, that people go home safe every day from work, and there's food on the table for their families. And so I think for us as a family, what we've grown into, and the company that we've kind of been able to grow, and again, we don't grow it alone. There's a lot of good people that have worked in our business for a lot of years. I think our average tenure is 25 years
Really?
in our business when you look across all the employees. you know. So there's there's a lot of passion within our ranks, and a lot of good people that have helped us get there. You know, I think our purpose is to continue to survive and to continue to grow as an organization. For sure.
How do you create that? How do you think about, maybe creating is the wrong word because maybe it's already been creating, but when you look at the momentum that the business has had, right? Because I mean, this isn't a business that's sort of limping into its 100th year.
Sure.
You know, it's really sprinting in a lot of ways, right? I mean, it's extremely successful. You're not in a turnaround, you're in a continuation, and that probably has its own sort of like pressures, which is how do I keep it moving forward?
Sure.
How do you think about, you know, continuing the legacy forward while at the same time not falling into the trap of getting stuck in your old ways, right? I mean, you've been successful starting from scrap to, I mean, I remember this from talking to your dad, you know, the color he was making, I think it was the meal kits, right, for the Army, and you know, sort of going into rolled steel, and you guys have invested in expansion geographically. You understand, so you've got to maintain what you've done, but also look to the future. How do you kind of balance that out?
Well, you know, I'll give my dad a lot of credit, and my grandfather before him. They've always been had a mindset of flexibility, right? Where we don't get entrenched into what we do. We always keep our head out, and if we have to pivot, we pivot. You know, as an organization, and so I think, you know, we've been able to have that culture within our ranks, where our management staff has very much similar philosophies, right? And you know, and so I think that's helped keep us young. You know, it allows us to admit mistakes and address them, and you know, and so I think for you know, as you look at generational succession, you know, the next generation is not there to tear everything down and to rebuild it. The next generation is to build on what's worked, and so I think, you know, as we look forward to the next 25, 50 years, it's really taking this culture of innovation and allowing it to continue to flourish within our ranks, hiring the right people. You know, making sure we put the right individuals in charge of the different areas of our company, and you know, just staying, you know, having that young personality still, and how we go to market.
When you said something I want to pull out, which was like succession planning. So I think succession planning is something that businesses in general, and certainly small businesses, don't think about well enough, right? And so I'd be interested to get your input on sort of two different types of succession planning, right? There's the one I'll mention the one first I want to talk about second, which is sort of long-range succession planning, right? It's maybe generational handoff, and I think we can think about that in a few different ways. But then there's also succession planning to sort of grow, right? So if you're the vice president of the distribution group and eventually maybe you want to become president and CEO and what have you, there needs to be some thought now about who's going to take over the distribution group, right? Who's going to start directing corporate purchasing if you move on? You got to make decisions which one to get rid of first and build in people behind, and then they've got to build people behind that. So, or at least that's how I would think about it. I'm interested, you know, you're living it, you know, what have you been seeing? What's working? How do you think about it? What are lessons learned that haven't worked?
Sure. So my dad and I, we spent a lot of time on this topic, obviously.
Really?
You know, well, we've gone to family business conferences. There's a conference called Transitions.
Okay.
By I think Family Business Magazine out of Philly puts it on. I thought it was a very fascinating conference with, I think, you know, family businesses from all over the North America, and I think there was parts of Europe that were there last time we went. You know, and you know, the succession planning, I feel, can't happen by accident. You know, and when I look at, you know, when you read all the books, when you go to these conferences, if you see the businesses that succeeded in generations through death only, you know, it's always a bumpy road. You know, so you know, just like you said, having a plan, having a purpose, you know, and alignment as to why your business is continuing, I think is really a big part of it. Because, you know, again, as you grow in generations, you get more and more shareholders, more and more family members. You're not going to have 5 generations of family members with similar ideologies, right? You know, there's always going to be conflict. There's always going to be differences of opinions, and so, you know, if you let kind of individual say personalities truly dominate family businesses, it becomes difficult to get that many shareholders on the same page at the same time, right? So I know we've worked very hard on our side with my dad and his 2 brothers on alignment for what we're doing, why we're doing it. You know, we've hired outsiders to come in and help us. You know, Ernst & Young came in for a couple of years and worked with us as to you know how we do it. And, you know, making sure that we don't succeed by accident. You know, we succeed generations with purpose, and I think that's how we can remain successful for sure.
Leveraging those outside experiences. When do you find that thoughts about the longer term succession plan help you in the short term succession planning or the short term sort of growth inside the organization and building people up?
Yeah, for the most part, good and bad for the size of our company. We're big, but at the same time, we're not General Electric.
Right.
We don't have 40,000.
700 employees is still pretty big, right?
It is, but it's sometimes hard to really. It's always hard for a smaller business to hire someone and try to find something for them to do, right? And I think with us, a lot of our hiring practices recently has been much more about personality, cultural fit than it is necessarily about the resume, right? And so when you're doing that, sometimes you say, look, we've got a really good guy or gal. We want to find a role for him. Let's find a role for him. And and sometimes that's hard to do because you got to make sure people's job descriptions are fulfilling. There's always some meat behind what they can contribute. And so I think on the family side, it's like you mentioned before, it's important that you get a lot of different experiences and you move into different roles. So you can't just. I find a family member that comes into a corner office right after college is probably the worst thing you could possibly do to a family business. You got to. My grandfather had a great saying. He goes, "Work every job so when you're on the top, no one can BS you." Right? And I think he's absolutely right. That's at least what I've seen in my career. My experiences from working on the shop floor to the IT department to sales.
Where'd you start?
I like to say my very first job was killing rats in the warehouse behind the IT department.
Behind the IT department, okay.
So I started by destroying old computers and putting them back together to build supercomputers.
Is that right?
Yeah, and by the time I finished, they were all already outmoded. Right? So it was a very busy summer job for me. But I did 2 years in the shop floor in our packing department, which was the 2 best summer jobs I ever had.
What were you like? What is a summer in the packing department at Ulbrich Steel look like?
It's hot. I'll tell you that. No, but you were working 7 to 3 with overtime opportunities as a college kid.
Yep.
And you're making a lot more money than your friends. And I could leave at 3 o'clock and go golfing every day after that.
Yeah.
And I remember my routine was to grab a pizza after the golf course and watch the Yankees game. 4 days a week, right? So it was a very great 2 summers for me in college. But you learn a lot about the business. You learn about what about the people that put their sweat and blood into your family business in general, and what they sacrifice in order to make sure everything gets done, right? And so I think having employing people, whether it's family or non-family, making sure they have the right experiences and they have opportunities to say give input and grow is probably one of the most important things that we're going to be facing as we go forward here, because there is that silver tsunami coming. I think every manufacturing company has it, where there's a lot more retirees than blood in the organization to move up.
So how are you guys thinking about that?
I'll say we've been doing a good job accepting it.
Okay.
Right. I think there's probably a lot of businesses that still ignore it. And they say, oh, when this person retires, then we'll figure it out. We've done a lot of hiring on our shop floor. We've done a lot of coaching and training and leadership conferences for our employee base. Really just to get people prepared to start taking over roles in the next 5 to 7 years.
So what I'm sort of hearing you saying is we've hired in some younger talent, and then we're investing to grow them because
Sure.
5-6 years from now, some of those tenured employees maybe been around 30, 40 years are going to be heading off.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the natural state of the manufacturing industry.
Yeah.
If you look at where, we had huge hiring years in the late 80s. And all those people in the late 80s are finally retiring,
right.
Which is, I always laugh and say, it's so nice, all these guys stuck around for so long. Either that or they couldn't get hired anywhere else, so they just stayed. So it's not easy to have these massive waves of retirements, and then.
Well, there's so much tribal knowledge in there.
But again, it's not just tribal knowledge. It's finding the ranks underneath them to be able to coach people to move up into roles, right? And you're never 100% on hiring. Right. I mean, it's just kind of the natural law of what hiring truly is. So, so to really invest your time and your money and with a lot of unknowns is always
Who
it takes
who
time.
owns that whole plan in the organization?
Yeah, it's very decentralized for us.
Okay.
I think I know my father works a lot on it. Our COO Jay works a lot on it. I know my boss Greg works a lot on it. So it's very I think it's very important for some of these guys to make sure the work they've put in for the last 35, 40 years continues.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's the great thing about our culture is that the older talent that we have doesn't want to see all the work they've put in fade away. They want everybody behind them to be successful in their career.
So again, they're bought into the legacy, right? They want to leave something behind that's going to be greater than when they were there. You said something I want to ask you about. You said my boss.
Yeah.
So what's that like to sort of be on the path you're on?
Sure.
Be at the family, but then you've got a boss. How does that work?
Well, his name is Greg, and he says it's miserable. Again, I hold the philosophy that when I'm in the office 8 to 5, I'm a day-to-day guy. If you come into a family business thinking that you're an owner when you have a job to do, and you act like an owner, and you don't act like you have a role that has to be executed, I think you're going to fail. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, my mindset is very much to where, I have an organization. I work through the organization. There's a hierarchy you have to respect. At times I'll be on the phone with my father, and get advice from him, right, as a coach. But most of the stuff that I work through is with the people that either report to me or that I have to report to within the organization.
And so you work hard to sort of work within the structure of the organization. Absolutely. And just be when you're doing your job, whether it's distribution or purchasing, you just work as your role in the organization, understanding you got to be accountable to some people and some people have got to be accountable to you, and don't sort of play the owner card.
Absolutely.
Smart way to do it.
Yeah. I don't know how I could be successful without it, honestly. Because it would be nice to have 8 weeks of vacation and do whatever you want as an owner. But at the end of the day, I don't know how you could be successful in a family business without putting in the time, putting in the effort to really humble yourself to the work.
Or any business, really. I want to ask you a couple questions about switching gears a little bit, but ask you about supply chain.
Sure.
Given where you guys sit in the market, sort of moving materials around, you probably have a pretty interesting view. Number one, tariffs that have been around for a while, on China, that impact that may have had in sort of the steel business. We've got the war in Ukraine and maybe what's going on there, the global pandemic, ships can't get in, can't get out. It's a lot to talk about, and so I don't really know where to start, but it's something that I hear about all the time, whether I'm, cocktails with some manufacturing friends at a manufacturing event, supply chain costs going up, time going up. I'm just curious your perspective. What are you seeing out there? What have you seen? Where do you see it going?
Sure. Well, inflation's real. Let me start with that. One of the biggest issues that I see is that localized supply chains have become a lot more dominant than international supply chains. And I think we're lucky as a business where 80% of our spend is domestic here, or within North America, you could say. And when we buy from overseas, it's really for capabilities, not just for price.
What do you like? Can you just elaborate?
Yeah.
on that?
So if there are products that are made in the U.S. that are, say, not optimized for what we have to sell, whether it's a certain thickness, a certain width, or even a certain chemistry that they don't make here. So if we have to go overseas to support some of our customers, we will. But
so there's items from a steel and metal perspective that you just can't buy in North America?
Correct. Absolutely.
I did not know that.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that's where the tariffs make it a little difficult. You have to buy these overseas, or if there are some things where if you bought here, it might cost you $40 per pound to buy, or if you buy it overseas, it's really, $1.50. Okay. And if you look at inflation, what you'd be doing to, our customer base, they can't be in business if they have to pay those type of costs, period. So you have to take, say, capabilities that are in the international markets and put them into the U.S. market here, right? Mm-hmm. But so with the tariffs, it's made things a little more complicated. It has driven up costs that you have to pass along. The government does have the exclusion process, which is hit or miss at times. You're never quite sure what you're going to get. So as a result, you have to put a caveat of if we have to pay tariffs, we have to pass them along, which means and I'd like to coach our customers that they should really tell their customers the same exact thing. Right. So at the end of the day, it's really the consumer that has to absorb the costs, right? But the other big thing is that the push to move manufacturing overseas for the last 30 years is alive and well in the steel industry as well. There's really only 4 major stainless melters left in the U.S. When my dad was doing my job as the corporate purchasing person, I think he said there was 25 or 30 he could buy from in North America back.
And we're down
in
to
the
like
90s.
4.
Now we're down to 4. And so if you think of the power these guys have over the industry itself, it's pretty significant. If they all go up on price, what are your options?
Not much.
Yeah. So I from say a transportation say insight there, cost of containers is uncontrollable, really.
The shipping containers, talking about, yeah.
And so you add that to tariffs, you add that to the unreliability of when something will ship. China is obviously the biggest consumer of stainless steel in the world. Again, I speak for stainless. I'm not going to speak for carbon or some of the other markets.
Yeah.
That's my expertise area. When they find that they're not using as much steel as they need, they're going to find other markets to dump it in.
Right.
And so a lot of it's coming over here. A lot of it's coming to Canada, believe it or not, because Canada doesn't have too many tariff restrictions. And so I always find funny in the world we're in right now, you have all these different markets. We think we're a very globalist type of society, but at the end of the day, you have all these markets operating with their very different roles, with very different capacity models and different specialties. What they make in Europe, similar to the U.S., but it's not exact. It's designed for the European market. What they make in China is very designed for China's infrastructure approach. So and in the U.S. here, what we've really tried to do is build much better partnerships with our vendor base. There's not a lot of them left. We need them hopefully as much as they need us.
Hopefully.
So that's kind of the sales pitch we like to go in with, and really try to support the different products to help our customers gain access to metal that is say easy for them to buy. Yeah.
Aside from the prices having gone up, are you finding it difficult to get supply, or is it just a price issue, really?
So, we're in July here in 22.
Yeah.
It was a lot more difficult in February 21 than it is in July of 22. I think over the last 18 months, one of the hard things was inventories were so low coming out of the pandemic. Everyone had to restock. And if you talk to any manufacturing company and ask them, what was your inventory January 1st of 2021? They all had nothing on the shelf because they wanted to drive down, the
carry costs and get
as
cash
much as possible, right?
Yep.
So I found that every steel company in essentially North America put all their orders in at the same exact time. Right. So the melt mills, again, there's not a lot of them, really got constrained overnight. Starting November of 20.
So they went from not a lot of orders to just more orders, and they could shake a stick.
They went from under capacity with layoffs in 2020 to now they have to run 7 days a week, and hire about 70 to 150 people per company.
Okay.
And think, if you talk to these big steel companies, they're not always in the most urban areas.
Right.
They're out there. Where especially if you think of old world America, right? Some of these mills. The whole town was built around the town, right? And so some of the mills that we buy from still very similar that way. So it's been a struggle over the last year and a half for a lot of the mills to keep up with capacities or demand. We're getting into third quarter here. Lead times are for us to buy or I would say early fourth quarter. Capacities have eased up a lot. We're finding inventories are at really high levels. There was a big push over the last 18 months to don't worry about carrying costs, just get it on the shelf because we're losing sales.
Yes,
have it, right?
right.
So a lot of our customers are restocked tremendously.
So now it's starting to calm back down.
Now it's starting to slow down.
Do you think that the slowdown will impact pricing?
On certain products, yeah. The pandemic or say the post-pandemic world has allowed companies to kind of get in their own corner of the sandbox and not compete with each other, right? So, we might start seeing more competition, and that's the only thing that's going to help with pricing is competition.
From a mill's perspective, you mean?
Yeah, because really, if you think of where we are in the supply chain, a lot of our pricing is subject to what we get charged.
Yeah, of course.
We get a price increase, we have to give a pass one on. we get a price decrease. Well, we get to pass one on too. And so I'd much rather give a price decrease than an increase at times. It makes for a better customer relationship.
I bet it does.
But I'm not convinced that all products will have competition. The services and of some of these mills have been cut back so far. I don't think they necessarily have an interest in rebuilding what they lost over the last, say, 2 years. So if that's the case, you might see some sections of the steel market with pricing drop tremendously. Specifically say something like sheet product, where there's a lot of Chinese competition, and especially, you're hearing now 232 might go away. If that happens, some of these products could become 25% cheaper from Asia overnight. And so you will see some price decreases on that side of it. But if you're talking about a very specialty product going into, say a titanium product going into, say the Joint Strike Fighter, that's not going anywhere anytime soon.
No.
Those prices are going to continue to rise because the number of people can actually support a product like that is so few that there's very, say, inelastic.
And lots of pressing on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've talked a lot about innovation, Jon, and what's worked for Ulbrich over all these years. What do you see as the future? What's the future innovation? What's the future of Ulbrich look like? How do you guys think about that?
Sure. Well, we've always believed we call it lighter and tighter. So it's going to get thinner, and the tolerances and say the specifications will always get more difficult, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we're set up for a world of where specialty continues to dominate. And if you look at our business, that's who we are. We're not a capacities-driven organization where pounds tells the full story. We're much more, even on the service center side, we're much more of a specialty type of company. So I do see that there's going to be a whole wave of, say, green energy type of innovation. Mm-hmm. I think batteries on the horizon is going to be very, very busy. The first person to build a car that can drive 3,000 miles on one fill up on the battery is going to be life-changing for us. I don't think that's going to happen in our lifetime.
Right.
Don't get me going on EVs though.
Why?
Well, I think the practicality of it in terms of what they have for say growth models is not exactly realistic to consumer demand. We do a lot within automotive. Like 30% of our business is automotive related.
Is it?
And a lot of it is for internal combustion engines. And if you look at where our customers are, what they're shipping into, and what the consumer habits are in America, you might see a lot more hybrids than EVs here. Mm-hmm. But there is going to be a market for it. I think it'll be interesting though with the innovation of EVs. How do they take that technology and do something different with it when it comes to internal combustion engines? I'd love to have a hybrid car with a V8 engine, right? So you never know what the world's going to look like. But I know for us, one of the things we're really focused on is new products. When my dad was here, he mentioned that 20% of our sales on an annual basis is from new business. Business where we haven't had in, let's say, the last 2 years. And I see that continuing. As products fall out because they either get outmoded, moved offshore, or habits in the consumer end change, or whatever our customers aren't doing anymore. We'll be filling that in with something new in the marketplace. Right now a lot of it is on the EV side. The carbon capture side.
Carbon capture.
Yeah. So I think this is one of the more neat things we're trying to explore further is steel for almost like filtration systems where they can suck in carbon coming out of a coal plant and actually turn it into energy.
Really?
And so when you look at the world of steel, stainless steel is really a huge answer for a lot of the green initiatives, right? Because it lasts forever. It's very recyclable. Most of the stainless steel we buy in America it's about 85 to 93% recycled.
Really?
Yeah. So they take all the scrap metal, melt it down. They throw in a few raw elements to make the chemistry that you're looking to make. But it's the recycling of stainless is technically very green. So now the coal is needed to actually power the power plant. Maybe it's a little different, but no. So I think these stainless for us is a big answer to allowing a lot of technologies to exist. because you can't put, like I said, you can't put a carbon in there that'll corrode. If you put say like a 316L stainless, which is very corrosion resistant, into a filtration system, it'll last for a long, long time. So we're really working to position ourselves to where when these new technologies do come up into more of a mainstream, we're around and available with supply chains and with experience with informing to produce it for our customer base.
So how do you guys, who's sitting there thinking about, okay, well, we got to be positioned for carbon capture. We got to be positioned for the EV battery stuff. Who's thinking about that at Ulbrich?
Sure. We have a marketing department that works hard scouring the internet. I call it cyber stalking, to see what our customers are working on. But I'll say we've done a very good job at the company developing a commercial team that is very in tune with what's going on. We have outside sales staff that works hard to visit customers, ask key questions about forecasting new business. We have an inside sales staff that is not just transacting orders. They're really they really do a good job of taking an order and asking the why behind it. Why are we getting this business? What else do you need? That type of stuff, right?
And you guys harvest that information?
Yeah, and so it's nice, again, we're small enough to where our management staff's in tune with pretty much everything going on within the company. Our management staff is on site. We don't have people living down in Texas managing Wallingford. Right. So our team is, and to be fair too, when you're 35, 40 years in the business, right? Like some of my coworkers on the commercial side, they are very in touch with what's going on. What's made them successful in the past and what they need to replicate to make them successful going forward. So
it's one thing to know the information. It's another thing to have customers that are willing to give it to you. It's another thing to get it, but then to take that information and then operationalize it to say, hey, we got to learn something. We got to position the business to be somewhere when that market comes available. It's a whole other thing, and it sounds to me like one of the keys to 98 years of success.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, that's pretty awesome, man. Jon, it's been great. It's been great talking to you. A lot of awesome stuff. I'm going to move us to rapid fire round of questions. Start to wrap it up. You
Sure.
ready? All right, my man. I know the answer to the first one, but I'm going to ask it to you anyway. Red Sox or Yankees?
I'm going to go with the Yankees.
Starbucks or Dunkin'?
Dunkin'.
iPhone or Android?
I have the iPhone.
Sports car or SUV?
SUV.
Do you have a favorite business book?
That's a good question. I just picked up in my office a book called Trapped in the Family Business.
Really?
Yeah. So this keys as to what to avoid.
No, that's pretty cool.
I'll give that one a
nod.
Sure.
I appreciate that. If you had to do something, Jon, other than work at Ulbrich Steel, what would you do?
Well, that's a good question. I went to college in Texas. I probably would have stayed down there.
Really?
It's warm. I don't understand living in the cold. So, but that's a good question. Never really thought of it, to tell you the truth. This is something that I've wanted to do my whole life, and it's where I am. So
enjoy where you are. I
Yeah.
absolutely love that. What's something, Jon, that you learned early in your life or earlier in your career that you think helped propel you to all the success you've had so far?
I think humble yourself to the work. Don't think you're above anything. And I think inside management, if you're not willing to do it, why should anybody else be willing to do it?
Absolutely. Don't ask someone to do something you're not willing to do yourself. What's something, Jon, that you learned later in your life or later in your career that if you could go back and tell young Jon, and if he'd listen to you, you think have a real positive impact on him?
How about your wife's always right?
Yeah.
But no, I think relationships matter. Right, especially on the family side, I wish I spent more time with my dad, working on family businesses at a younger age. I wish I spent a lot of time with my grandfather, but when you're 15, 16, 17 years old, you're not necessarily thinking about 20, 30 years in the future, right? So if I could tell young Jon something, it would be spend more time with the people that have been successful and have laid the path for potentially in the future. So you can learn even more from them.
Man, that's fantastic, Jon. That was a great end. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so very much for coming on. 98 years young. We're rooting for another 98 years.
Thanks. This is good. Thank you.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by CompassMSP.
Thanks for listening and spending some time with me today. My goal is to help build a strong manufacturing community, and it would be impossible to do without all of you.